Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 to verse 5. The words of the Lord Jesus. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Oh, let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. This is the word of the Lord. Now, the Sermon on the Mount, just to bring us up to speed, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has been outlining the kind of kingdom that he's come to build. Something of a manifesto. He tells us, this is what I've come to build. This is what I've come to change. He's come to start a new world under God's kingship. And he's describing it, what it's like and what it will take to enter. And he's covered all sorts of topics because this is a world, the world that he's bringing us into is completely different. It's different in every way from the world that we're used to. And so he describes all these different things. He describes how our relationships with other people are going to be different. He describes what our religious life, what our connection, what our relationship to God is going to be like in this kingdom. He describes the way, the last couple of weeks we've been talking about how we relate to material good, earthly goods. How do we relate to those things? He's talked about all those. And now here in Matthew chapter 7, we're going to look at a couple more do nots. The Sermon on the Mount has quite a few do nots. They're sort of moral red lines that Jesus paints and says, in my world that I'm building, this will not pass. This is not acceptable in the world in the kingdom that I'm setting up. You're used to doing these things in the old kingdom, but I'm just telling you, in the new kingdom, it's not going to work like that. And the first one we look at today is here in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Do not judge. So Jesus says, we've mentioned this before, there's more than one way to tear the world down. There's more than one way to tear the world down. There's some that'll get you on the news, and there's some that won't. There's some that are respectable, and there's some that aren't so respectable. But there's many different ways to tear down the world with your hands that God has made. And Jesus says one of those ways is what he's talking about here in Matthew chapter 7. And he says, stop destroying. Stop destroying the world. And as Christians, we are interested in becoming people who do not destroy the world. And one of the things that's happening all around us, I'll just tell you, if you're having a miserable time in the world right now, you want to know one of the reasons the world is so miserable is because of what he's talking about here in Matthew chapter 7. So he's building a new kind of world. Now this one specifically is, I think, it's special, and it comes here at the end of lots of other do nots for a reason. And that is, when you get here to Matthew chapter 7, presumably you're listening to Jesus' sermon, you've listened to all these lessons he's taught, and as he gets near the end of the sermon, he has to look at us and say, now listen, don't judge. Now, why is that so important for us to say here at this point? Because this is how you might act towards other people once you have started to receive God's grace. So let's say you've been a Christian for a little while, and you start to get the Lord begins to transform your life, and you start to get all of these other earlier lessons that we've looked at in the Sermon on the Mount, and you're not doing this, and you're not doing that, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And you look at the world around you, you see people doing all those things that you've learned not to do. What's your first instinct going to be? To judge, to start laying judgments left and right. And Jesus tells us here, do not judge. Now, as Dick mentioned, it's very important for us to realize this is not meant to be taken absolutely. We all can tell there's something a little off about the person who is just doing wild and stupid stuff. And as soon as you try to call them out and they say, hey, didn't Jesus say don't judge? So what are you doing judging? Well, I want to tell you that judging is actually very good. And if you don't judge, then you need to repent of that and start doing some judging. Let me tell you why. Jesus himself commands us in other places to judge. Let me just explain how these absolute commands work. We've already observed this. Remember earlier we saw Jesus said, don't swear an oath. And the Bible is filled with people swearing an oath. What Jesus is doing, we might call it we've said every week that he's probing our hearts. he's wanting us to look inside and say, hey, what's going on when you're swearing those oaths? What's going on when you're doing this or you're doing that? And he's not saying in all circumstances you shouldn't do this. In fact, as we'll see, there's many circumstances in which you must judge. But he's saying, but there's something real ugly going on in most of y'all's hearts when you're doing this judging. And that's what he wants to talk to us about. It's literally going to the doctor. It'll say you got some problem, and the doctor wants to diagnose what your problem is. He may run you through some tests that may seem very ridiculous. He may be like, here, get on this treadmill and run until your heart stops. And you're like, well, that doesn't seem like I don't want to do that. But he's like, yeah, I'm doing this for a reason. I'm doing this to do this diagnostic test, see how you respond to this. Let's see what's going on. And these commands that Jesus gives are a little bit like that. Jesus says, don't judge. Let's see how you do. He wants us to check what's going on in our hearts when we're doing this judging. So he's probing our hearts, like this kind of diagnostic test. Again, more modern people read this and they assume that Jesus means something like, never tell anyone that you think that what they're doing is bad ever, ever. Well, first of all, that is completely incoherent. I mean, seriously, try to do that just the rest of the day. Just the rest of today, try not to judge anything or anyone or to have any moral disapproval of anything. First of all, moms, you won't make it very long, Mother's Day. You won't make it very long. Try to make it through the rest of your day without having a moral opinion one way or the other about what your children are doing. It don't work like that, right? Mothers, you must judge. Mothers must judge. In fact, anyone who exercises authority has to judge. In the Bible, judging is actually the kind of the verb that goes along with being a ruler. What do rulers do? There's a whole book in our Bible called Judges. And you read it, you know what they are? They're all rulers. They're kind of like kings. They judge. To judge means I'm in charge and I decide what goes and what doesn't go. I'm the one who labels acceptable and unacceptable. And God has designed us as human beings to rule his world. And part of ruling the world is judging. Part of ruling your household is judging. If you have a judgment-free household, you are abdicating your responsibility as a parent. Guess what? Your mom, dad, you know what part of what your job is to do? To be the judge of your household. To lay down the line and say, this is what's going to be allowed and this is what's not going to be allowed. So this is obviously not what Jesus means when he says, do not judge. Okay? Judging is healthy and inevitable. So let's kind of boil down to what judging actually means. Judging mainly has a negative meaning. It means to strongly disapprove of. To strongly disapprove of. Imagine you've got a big stamp that says unacceptable. And you stamp things with that unacceptable stamp whenever you see it. Your kid does something wrong, you stamp that stamp right in their forehead. Unacceptable, right? They do something unacceptable, right? You're grading you're grading a homework paper, you put that stamp unacceptable, right? That's judging, right? Even sometimes we don't even verbalize. We're driving down the road. We see somebody on the side of the road doing something we disapprove of. In our minds, just up here, we took that stamp, we put a stamp on it, said unacceptable, right? We do this all the time. And Jesus says, hey, you might want to watch what's going on in your heart when you're doing that. Now, again, it's actually imperative that you do it. Let me give you some examples of judge mode. We all do this. And when I'm going to read these, don't read this as me critiquing you or saying don't do this. You need to do these things. It's right for you to do these things. But you need to be careful what's going on in your heart when you do them. So let me give you a couple examples of judge mode. What are some actions that qualify as judging? When you assume a person's motives, right? Somebody does something and you're like, I know why they did that. Unacceptable, right? When you criticize a person's actions. Most simply, someone does something, whether it's your kid or somebody else, they do something and you say unacceptable. When you think of a person overall, their character as being a bad person or a bad influence. Like we all have people in our life, or maybe our kids have people in their lives that we've been like, nope, that's a bad influence. We put that unacceptable stamp, like that's a bad dude, you need to stay away from that person. Or how about this, last one, when you declare what a person deserves. When you say that person ought to be punished, or they ought to be locked up, or they ought to lose their job, or they ought to have this happen, or they ought to have that happen. You're putting in unacceptable, you're using that unacceptable stamp. And all those are good things. In fact, you have to do those things. You're like I said, if you're a parent or you're trying to work through life, you just can't get through life without deciding that some things are unacceptable. But again, Jesus has us on that treadmill, and he's saying, let's watch what's going on in your heart, though, when you're running. What's going on in your heart when you're doing this judging? Something real ugly and real dangerous can actually be happening while that's going on. So, I just say, if you lack moral judgment, I would encourage you today to repent and start judging. But our judging can go wrong, just like, a referee. What's a referee doing on a field, whether he's umpire or a referee blowing his whistle? He's saying unacceptable. Hey, what you did on that play, that's unacceptable. He blows the whistle, stops the play. That's unacceptable. Penalty, right? He's just using that unacceptable stamp. Now, if anybody in the world knows, we in Cincinnati know that referees can get things very, very wrong, right? Yes, we know to our own great pain. We know that refs often get it wrong. And that means something can go wrong when we judge. When we're wielding that unacceptable stamp, we can get some things very wrong. So let's think about our hearts. Let's think about what's going on there when we judge. And it's pretty clear what Jesus means. Look what he says, verse 1. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So in this little command that Jesus gives, what's the problem? The problem is that all of your attention with that unacceptable stamp is focused out there, and none of it's focused here. The problem with judging is that you're ignoring your own sickness. In your eagerness to label everything in the world as unacceptable, you haven't actually stopped to think about what's unacceptable about you. What's unacceptable about your own heart. And just your eagerness to judge others, or the spirit in which you judge others, shows you're completely blind to your own hypocrisy. Completely blind to the fact that you yourself are condemned by the same standard. So, Jesus says, here's the warning for you. God will hold you to the same standard. He will subject you to the same scrutiny. Another thing about scrutiny. We're so good at using that unacceptable thing. At least I am. I got like a microscope. And I'm analyzing everybody. I'm analyzing your words, your actions, your motives, your character with my microscope. I'm just looking for anything I can grab that stamp and slam and brand you as unacceptable. When we're like that, when you're very eager to start whipping out that stamp, to start judging, when you're eager to do that, what it shows is that you haven't taken a long look at your own heart. If you're so eager to label other folks as unacceptable, it's a good chance that you haven't taken long enough to look at your own heart. Okay? The sin in my own heart, if I could really see how ugly what's on the inside is, I would want very much for everybody to put their unacceptable stamp away. If I were to walk down the street with everything that's in my heart on the outside, everybody who drove by would use their stamp. And pretty soon I would be crying for mercy and begging everybody to put away their unacceptable stamp. But we forget about that. When I'm out there, I'm just stamping everybody left and right. I'm forgetting about what's going on in here. So Jesus says, you better be real careful with that. If you're so eager for other people to receive justice, then maybe that's exactly what you'll receive. Instead, when I recognize the sin in my own heart, what do I want? I want desperately for there to be something in this world besides justice. What's justice? You do this, this is what you get. You act unacceptably, you get treated like an unacceptable person. Now let's be honest. If what's in our heart could be revealed, every one of us would be rightly labeled, not just by people, we'd be labeled by God as unacceptable, and we would get what unacceptable people deserve. And so if I know about the sin in my heart, I want there to be another principle in this world besides justice. I want God and I want other people to treat me not with justice. I want them to treat me with mercy and grace and forgiveness and love. That's what I will really crave. Now, this is Mother's Day, and I think it's a truly wonderful thing. I would say almost all of us, our first experience of something like the grace of God is from our mother. It's kind of like our first experience of grace. You know, how do we come into the world? Completely dependent, desperately needy. Need. We don't do nothing for nobody. We just need everything done for us. We are thankless and demanding. You know what it's like to be a mom? It's just like you've got to take care of these people that are thankless and they are demanding. They are even wicked and cruel and hurtful. And yet, you had this huge love that embraced you over and over again and did not treat you as unacceptable, even though you were. Who knows better than your mom how unacceptable you are? Nobody knows better than her. And yet, this wonderful thing that God has built into the world, where we come into the world and we receive something and we say, you see that? What I need is not to be given what I deserve. Is that what you want, what you deserve? We sure complain like it. I want what I deserve. Jesus says, is there something else that you want? Wouldn't you like to have something greater than what you deserve? Wouldn't you like to have mercy? Wouldn't you like to have grace? So as earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells us that we forgive as we are forgiven. Remember the Lord's Prayer? Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us. Remember the Beatitudes? Jesus says, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. In other words, if your only concern is to dish out justice and not grace to other people, then what are you going to say when God comes and starts dishing out justice and not grace to you? What do I want from God? Grace. What do I want to give to other people? Justice. Something doesn't match there, and Jesus says you can't have it both ways. If what you ultimately want is grace from God, for God to treat you not like what's on the inside, not like you're unacceptable, but you want him to treat you with grace, then you must show grace to other people. If you're so eager that other people will get what they deserve, then that's exactly what you're going to get, what you deserve. That's what Jesus says here. Now, as Christians, because we're so aware of our sin, we never reach a point in our Christian life. We should not, anyway. And if you do, it's not a sign of maturity. It's a sign of immaturity as a Christian. We never climb up to a point from which I can look down my nose at other people. I never reach a point where I've become so strong and so spiritual, so mature as a Christian that I can look down on other people. We never get to do that. We never reach that. In fact, the more we learn and the more we grow, what do we find out? More and more and more. I actually learn more about my own sinfulness the longer I go. If you've been a Christian for 10 years, you probably have a greater idea of how sinful you are than a person who's been a Christian for a year. And if you've been a Christian for 20 years, then you ought to have twice as much proof as the person who's been a Christian for 10 years. The longer we go, it's not, yes, we do beat some sins, but more than that, what we do is uncover more and more and more. We see how far down the corruption goes. And so if we are so eager for others to get what they deserve, it shows that we know nothing of grace. This is the completely opposite attitude. How does the Sermon on the Mount start? We come back to it almost every week. Blessed are the poor in spirit. That means those who are painfully aware of how unacceptable they are. Jesus starts out a sermon. He says, you know who's blessed? Those who are unacceptable and know it. And the rest of the sermon, he says, if you're telling yourself that you're not one of the unacceptable ones, that you're one of the good guys, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself. So Jesus says that we are blessed as we are poor in spirit. Now, one of the things I appreciate about Jesus putting this warning here at the end of the sermon is that it shows that this lofty, self-satisfied, self-righteous spirit that is always thinking about how wrong everyone else is and never thinks about how wrong they are, is only just one wrong turn away. One wrong turn away. It's amazing to me that as I grow as a Christian, as soon as God gives me one blessing or one grace, I immediately turn to start criticizing people who have not yet attained that. Like I can remember, it took me many years to start to build a prayer life where I was really felt like I was devoting time to prayer, walking with the Lord in prayer. But as soon as I started to get some good habits in that area, as soon as I started to be a person of more prayer, you know what I immediately began to think of people that didn't pray? What a bunch of losers. What a bunch of people don't measure up. You ought to be spending more time in prayer like I do, right? You see what we do? As soon as we get it, we immediately forget that God had to lead us or to teach us or to drag us up. We forget about all that. We immediately turn around and we begin to feel, see how eager the human heart is to feel superior to other people. And the main way we go about proving that we are superior is by proving to everybody how inferior they are, right? That's the easiest way to do it. It's much easier than striving to grow yourself. It's amazing that even the theology you learn, I would say this because we're kind of a church of people that probably like theology a little bit more than your average church. We geek out about stuff like that. We enjoy good, crunchy theology, there's a danger with that too. And this is the same danger. It's just one wrong turn away. Every new teaching I learn, every new discovery I make in the Bible, that just becomes one more extra bullet for me to shoot at other Christians. Oh, you don't even know about this. You don't even know about that, right? Immediately I become aware of how superior I am to other people. And Jesus says that is not the way of maturity. The way of maturity is to be over and over again reminded of just how blighted we are ourselves. So our one way to say this is that our tendency to judge others, even though that's a good habit, it's an essential skill of living, it gets stuck in the on position, and we can't turn it off. And we're everywhere we go, we're just unacceptable. There's a time and a place that you need to be able to exercise that discernment. But we all know people. We all know people that doesn't have an off switch. They cannot not be critical. They cannot not say that something is unacceptable at every moment. And this is a problem. You get stuck in the on position. And we can't help but disapprove strongly of anyone who doesn't do just what we would like them to do. We convince ourselves that every deviation from our will is a deviation from God's will. And this person then will do what? More and more people will get hammered by that unacceptable stamp in their life. More and more people. No one will be exempt. They will go to war with more and more people. Your children, for example, moms, will eventually come under your censure. Eventually, you'll turn that judgmental gaze at them. I've seen this happen, sadly. A family that I knew had several children who were perhaps some of the most pharisaical people I ever met, some of the most self-righteous people I ever met. Astounding. They were some of the most critical people I ever met. And they were proud of their children when they were as critical as they were. The family's blown apart. They have kids and parents barely on speaking terms now. You can't turn it off. You let that train run away, and eventually, you think you're going to draw this line all of a sudden? You've been judging everybody in your life, giving no grace to anybody, and all of a sudden when your kids need grace, you're going to start showing them grace? I don't think so. It doesn't work like that. You cannot build a habit of judging, no grace, no grace, no grace, no grace, and then all of a sudden one day decide out of the blue that you're going to start showing grace to this one special person. No, you will not. You will not be able to. The muscle will atrophy. The kids in this case, one of them became twice as self-righteous as the parent, and the other one became completely indifferent to any moral standards at all. They became completely immune to anybody criticizing them about anything. One became a Pharisee, and the other became a tax collector. It's a sad story. So don't believe that you, mother, father, don't believe that you could not be so judgmental, that you could not become so judgmental that you would turn the beam of your displeasure against those you love best. Don't believe that you could never hurt those you love with it. And don't believe that you could never split your family over it. You absolutely could. All of us could without the grace of God. And this is why this is so important. This is a destructive, family-destroying, society-destroying, church-destroying sin. This tendency of demanding justice for other people and never showing grace. Now, what I think is interesting here about this passage is Jesus shows the tendency is for people who are wronger to judge people who are righter than them. Here's the guy with the beam in his eye, and he sees the guy with a little speck of sawdust in his eye. He says, come on, let me help you with that. You need some help. Let me help you out with that. I think it's a very fascinating thing that Jesus shows that oftentimes the people that are unusually fixated on helping others, let me help. I want to help. I want to be a helper. I want to be a teacher. I want to help you, are actually the people with the biggest problems of all. Because is there any better way to distract yourself from your own problems than to have a hyper-fixation on other people's specks in their eye? This is ironic because ultimately, what should this beam guy be doing? The guy with a plank in his eye, he should be coming to Mr. Speckman and saying, hey, can you help me out with this? Help me, I got a plank in my eye. Can you help me? I see you've whittled it down to just a speck of sawdust. Maybe you can help me with this plank in my eye. But he is, of course, blind to his own hypocrisy. Okay? And this means that, I think it's interesting. Jesus says in the last verse, verse 5, "You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Is it good? Is it part of God's plan for us to remove specks and beams from one another's eyes? Yeah, it is. See, that's judging. It's good. It absolutely is good for you to find, for us as Christians. Now, usually, by God's grace, we're somewhere between the speck and the plank, right? Some of us don't quite have a 2x4 in our eye, but we got a decent-sized stick stuck in our eye. And it's good for us to help one another. It's part of what we do as a church family. Part of what we do as a church family is we come to each other and we say, hey, let's talk about this. What's going on in your life? What's going on in my life? And I'm coming to you, and it's not me waiting for you to come to me. I'm coming to my brother and saying, listen, I've got I don't know if you noticed, there's something stuck in my eye, and I could really use some help with that, right? That's not the tendency, though, that Jesus is talking about here, though. So in an ideal world, we would be actually able to help one another. That's part of Jesus' plan for us. So the self-righteous world, then, is alienated both from their brothers and they're alienated from God. They end up alienated from God as well. So let me just give you a couple applications that hopefully you can take with you and help us to obey what Jesus says here. First of all, number one, our strongest disapproval, our strongest use of that unacceptable stamp should be directed inward. It's about what's in my heart. Now, I'm not talking about a word count like you need to count. Okay, today I said 10 things that were critical of other people, but I said 11 things that were critical of myself. Okay, so I'm good. That's not what it is. Again, Jesus is just saying, hey, check your heart. What are you most overwhelmed by? What are you most impressed by? How bad other people are or how bad you are, right? What are you most overwhelmed by? In other words, if you were to say, are you always thinking about ways that you would like for other people to change? Do you have any ways that you would like to change? That you would like to be different? That you would like for God to transform you? Moms too. I would say for moms, this is probably difficult because as a mom, part of your whole job is just to continually be changing these little people that are in your life that God has given you. You're always changing them, and so you're constantly working on changing them. But don't forget, in all that work that you have to do about changing them, that God is working to change you as well. That he's parenting you, that he's transforming and changing you. And so never lose sight of the ways that you also need to be transformed and you need to change. We need to be very sensitive to our own hypocrisy. Let me point this out. This is not, though we like to say it, this is not just a religious person's sin. In fact, we have to really think about, are there ways, I can see some ways that we as Christians need to improve here. If we're not doing if we have a speck in our eye about this, the world literally has a plank in their eye about this. Our world is gone crazy with a skewed sense of morality. And it's a perfect example of breaking this command not to judge. They heap, our world, people in our world, heap abuse on people that break their favored or imaginary moral rules while continuing on blissfully ignorant of their much more, sometimes flagrant, wicked actions. For example, Steph and I have a friend on Facebook, which of course is a friend in a very loose sense, of course. He is constantly posting criticisms and complaints about churches, the way Christians behave, and what he thinks Christians ought to be up to, what Christians ought to be doing in the world. Constantly. An unending stream of criticism of Christians. Meanwhile, he lives a life that is flagrantly immoral. He lives a life, if he was living in the Old Testament, he would have been stoned to death for the life that he lives. And somehow, all of his thoughts are fixated on what's wrong with Christians in the world. He's a beam in the eye. That's literally what it's talking about. He's got a beam in his eye, and he thinks he's a competent judge of other people. So that's what's going on in our world, for sure. So first of all, reserve your strongest disapproval for what's going on in your own heart. Second, let us judge. When we do judge, let us judge differently than the world judges, right? Again, we always have to judge. There's no not judging. You have to judge. But when you judge, it ought to sound a little different. It ought to feel a little different. The words ought to come out of your mouth a little bit differently than if you're a Pharisee. A little bit different. Let me give you some examples. First of all, we ought to judge accurately and with a sense of proportion. Should not confuse the weightier matters of the law with the more trivial matters of the law. So I just talked about a person on Facebook who has strong words about Christians, but he's living a flagrantly immoral life. But Christians, sometimes we get our pet peeves, we get our pet topics that we really care about, and we turn that into sort of this rule that we judge other people by. Whatever your thing is that you're really hyped about. And it's true. No, my point is not that thing is not a thing that matters. It's not a thing that you should have an opinion about. My point is never forget that is not the only moral rule in Scripture, right? And you may be able to condemn many, many people and label them as unacceptable because of that thing, but you should still not forget that you are labeled unacceptable yourself for many, many other, perhaps, much more serious failings. What are we doing? We love those pet areas because it's a way for us to sort ourselves to the top, right? If I adopt a very strong stance on something, maybe a little theological issue or something I think the church ought to do, if I take a real strong stance on that, I can immediately look down my nose at everybody else. Say, you guys don't get it. You're not seeing this issue. And I've seen as a pastor, I've just seen people fixate on little things like that. And you want to say, to hear you talk, it sounds like you've never heard of the sin of pride. Have you never heard of the sin of envy? You never heard of the sin of hate? Those are real sins, and they're the weightier matters of the law, right? So keep things in right and correct proportion. Cautiously stick to what God has said. Some Christians, their strongest opinions about theology and the Bible and church and Christianity, their strongest opinions are things that they don't have two Bible verses to rub together on. Okay? And yet, that's what they feel the strongest about. Jesus says, something going on when you're on that treadmill, when you're on that judging treadmill. I don't like what I see here. Okay, so judge differently, judge accurately. Also, judge humbly. Judge humbly. Let me tell you, if I have got something right in my life that Seth doesn't have right in his life, do I have any reason to brag about that? That is God's grace to me. That God has been kind to me, and if it wasn't for God's grace, then I would be making the same mistake. So if I really do believe that Seth is mistaken, does that give me a right to stand on a moral high ground and look down at him? No, it does not. I have to say, brother, I disapprove. I say what you're doing is unacceptable. You should not do that. It's unacceptable. But I'm not going to say it in a way that implies that I'm his moral superior. Right? And then last, as we judge differently, we judge cautiously, accurately, humbly. Let's judge lovingly. Judge lovingly. Like we said about our moms, they judge us harder than anybody else, right? Moms judging us pretty hard, right? And yet somehow they find a way to. We know that they love us and they have our best interest at heart. So it's possible to do both. It really is possible. Your mom proves it to you. Your mom is a proof that it's possible to be judgmental and completely loving at the same time. For those judgments to come from a place of love. And so in a church, if you think this sermon is us saying, hey, as a church, let's just not get real worked up about these issues of sin or truth, and what does it really matter? That's not what we're saying at all. But what we're saying is, let's speak the truth in love. Let us be completely loving. May our judgments sound like our mother's judgments. We're painfully honest, and yet completely loving at the same time. And so I'd say the last application here is let us brim with grace. Brim with grace. Let's just be overflowing with grace. Someone who's overflowing with grace is like moment by moment just overwhelmed that God has been so good to me in spite of how little I deserve, what I actually deserve. Do you feel that moment by moment? Or is it like every Sunday you come to church, like you sing a song, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. That is true. I guess technically, I guess I deserve nothing and God's been pretty good to me. Sure, it's good. And then right back to it. Self-righteous, 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 self-righteous. But a person who's brimming, overflowing with grace is just moment by moment going through the day saying, can you believe it? Can you believe how good he's been to me? Can you believe that he's not given me what I deserve? Can you believe how he's forgiven me? One of the things as I was preparing this message, I got to thinking about Jesus' parables. Jesus told quite a few parables, in fact, where the whole parable is about your appetite for grace. Your appetite for grace. How delicious is grace to you? How wonderful is the thought that God does not give you what you deserve? Jesus tells a few parables and he says, do you get it or do you not get it? Is grace wonderful to you? Do you have an appetite for grace or not? That's what he says. Mothers, like I said, I think mothers, you can't be a mom without a lot of grace, without showing a lot of grace. And I want to commend you for that and praise God for that and say that's faithfulness. That God is that's a demonstration that God's grace is at work in you. You're living a model. Never forget that. You're living a model for your children to see. You're showing them day by day what grace means. And I know most of you mothers, and I just want to say to you, keep it up. Keep it up. Continue to live in that wonderful way. Now, Christians, you may have been a Christian for a long time. But remember, it's still a temptation. We're just one wrong turn away. Always. You've been a Christian for 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. Just one wrong turn, and you could become that self-righteous person. That's why Jesus puts us at the very end. It's one of his parting words to us in this sermon. Don't forget, just one wrong turn. One new grace that God gives you. One new lesson he teaches you. One new experience you have. One new thing that you figure out. One change that you make in your life, and all of a sudden you can become the self-righteous person that he's talking about here. Now, unbelievers, if you're not yet a Christian, you're not yet following Jesus, you don't belong to him, you say, I'm not a Christian yet, I want to say this is really wonderful news. Even this little passage that says, judge not, it's a reminder that salvation must be by grace. It has to be. It has to be. If salvation were something that we could earn, that we could deserve, that you could work up to, if you could be good enough to be saved, then it would be just fine for you to go out and judge people. Because you were good enough to get saved. You're good enough to save yourself. You're good enough to work it all out. So of course you can go judge other people and say that they need to do as good as you. But the fact that he says judge not is a reminder, like you're not going to get it. Remember, everything that we've seen up to this point in this sermon, in case you're under any delusion that you're good enough on your own, that's what the whole sermon up to this point has been. We read the sermon up to here. By now, you should say, yeah, I get it. There is no reason for someone like me to judge anybody else. And if you don't feel like that, then you got to go back to Matthew 5 and start over. Take the Jesus lesson again until you get to Matthew 7 and your heart says, yeah, that's right. I got to be real careful in judging other people. Turn your microscope to your own heart and don't be a victim for once. Our world thrives right now on victimization. Everybody wants desperately to prove that they're a victim. And so in other words, nothing is my fault, right? That I haven't done anything wrong. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I was at a graduation at the University of Kentucky this past Friday, and a guy gave one of the student from the student's body gave a what do you call that speech they give at the graduation, and his speech was essentially saying, you have nothing to be ashamed of. If you feel any shame, that's wrong. You've done nothing wrong. You have nothing to hang your head over. You should be completely comfortable in being who you are. You've done nothing to be ashamed of. A PhD and knows nothing. So Scripture tells us no, in fact, that we do have a great cause to be humbled before God. Our only hope in the world was for God, for the judge, to have mercy on our wrong. The wonderful news is, even our mothers, as good as they know us, they don't actually know us all the way. They don't actually know the full picture of who we are. And it's possible that if even our dear mothers who love us so much, if they could see all that we are, even they might stamp us as unacceptable. Even they might cast us out. But the wonderful thing to remember on Mother's Day is that his love for you and his grace for you even surpasses that of your own mother. Listen to what he says about his people. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. He says, your mom has a better chance of giving up on you, of chucking you, of judging you, of turning you out as unacceptable than God ever would.